After a long day of paintballing with my friends, we decided to set up camp in a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains. The day had been a blast, but as night fell, finding a good campsite became a challenge. We drove for about an hour, deeper into the woods, but everything we came across was either taken or didn't feel right. Finally, we stumbled upon a secluded spot by a small creek, but as we got out, I immediately noticed the trash strewn around. There were blue tarps hung over a makeshift table nailed to a tree, and it felt oddly abandoned. We brushed it off, thinking it was just some litter bugs. As we set up our tent under the fading light, I picked up a green bottle that turned out to be home and garden insecticide. A chill ran down my spine, but I was too tired to dwell on it. Once the tent was up, we lit a fire and cracked open some beers, cooking chili from scratch. As we settled in, I noticed a strange glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, I thought it might just be moonlight, but it didn't look right. It was more like the light you see over a city, and it was definitely stationary. Curiosity got the better of us, and my friends Jacob and I decided to check it out, leaving Isaac behind to tend to the fire. As we walked, I noticed that the trees around us had their bark stripped off in odd circular patterns. We joked about ghost beavers, but I felt a growing unease as we approached the hill. Then, out of nowhere, Jacob tripped and shouted, "Oh, expletive!" Just like that, the mysterious light went out. We exchanged nervous glances and decided it was time to head back. As we neared our campsite, I spotted Isaac wandering around, which struck me as odd. He was wearing a hooded jacket I hadn't seen before and was holding his paintball gun. Confused, I called out to him, but he didn't seem to hear. When we finally got back, Isaac lurched out of the tent and stumbled. He'd had a few more drinks while we were gone and mumbled something about watching a movie on his phone. But when we asked him about the paintball gun, he looked at us like we were crazy. "They're locked up in the truck," he said, clearly baffled. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I realized that someone had been walking around our campsite, and it definitely wasn't Isaac. We were all too drunk to drive, so we made the call to pack up and leave immediately. We didn't even bother folding the tent properly. We just shoved everything into it and jumped in my F-150. As I drove back down the dirt road, I felt a wave of dread wash over me when we reached the spot where the dirt mound had blocked our way in. The metal barrier we had seen earlier was now back in place, right on top of the mound. Panic surged through us, and I was hesitant to get out and move it. Instead, I slowly tapped it with the front of my truck, and thankfully, it toppled over. Relief was short-lived. As I drove down the Forest Service road, I noticed headlights behind us. Someone was following us, their lights off. My heart raced as I tried to speed up. They kept pace, maintaining a safe distance but never getting any closer. We finally hit the main paved road. I was just thankful to be heading back to civilization, but I took a different route to be safe. That night haunted me, and I knew I'd never return to that spot again. Some places are just better left unexplored. It was the mid-1980s, and I was about 12 years old, full of the reckless confidence that only comes with being a kid. My friends and I decided to go camping, telling our parents the usual white lies about sleeping over at each other's houses. We hiked down winding country roads to a grassy area surrounded by trees where we hoped to escape notice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around a fire we built from an old fallen tree. We talked and laughed, enjoying our freedom. But then, out of nowhere, a dirty white van appeared, slowly rolling toward us. Panic set in immediately. We all exchanged wide-eyed glances. What if our parents found out? Two men climbed out of the van, and one of them held up a dirty, torn pad of paper, claiming to be police officers. I remember my heart racing. Everything about them felt off. Their clothes were disheveled, and the van looked nothing like a real police vehicle. It was filled with rusty tools, and I felt a deep unease wash over me. "You've set fire to a listed tree," one of the men said, stepping closer. The other man nodded, and they both looked ready to grab us. Fear surged through us. We knew we were in trouble for sneaking out, but this felt different. Something wasn't right. We exchanged frantic glances, and in that moment, I shouted, "Run!" Without a second thought, we bolted into the woods, the sounds of the men cursing behind us. I could hear their footsteps pounding on the ground as we sprinted away, adrenaline propelling us through the trees. The chase felt endless as we ducked and dodged through the underbrush, desperately trying to put distance between us and the van. I remember hiding in the bushes, my heart racing as I heard the van's headlights flicker around us. We were alone, and we had to fend for ourselves. Eventually, we made our way back home, shaken but relieved to be safe. I remember my parents giving me a stern talking to for being late, but I hardly cared. I couldn't shake the image of those men from my mind. What were their true intentions? That night haunted me, and even now I often wonder what could have happened if we hadn't escaped. In May 2009, I was out of a 3-year relationship, living with my ex-girlfriend in a tense situation that was making me feel suffocated. So when a buddy from school suggested a camping trip, I jumped at the chance. We headed out to Flamborough, a beautiful area about an hour outside Toronto, and set up camp by Grindstone Creek. The first night was great. We fished, shared some laughs, and cooked up a nice dinner over the fire. As the night deepened, I felt a sense of relief and relaxation for the first time in weeks. We turned in just after midnight, and I shared a tent with my friend. He fell asleep quickly, but I stayed up a little longer, scrolling on my phone. Around 1:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by a high-pitched yipping noise outside. At first I thought it was a coyote, but as it grew closer, my unease started to build. It sounded really strange, almost like something was off about it. I nudged my buddy awake, and he heard it too. We debated what to do about the noise. Neither of us had brought anything to scare off animals, so my friend decided to take a flashlight and investigate. He unzipped the tent, and I held my breath, waiting for him to come back. When he did, he looked absolutely terrified. "It's not a coyote," he stammered. "It's a dude. A weird dude." My heart sank. The way he looked at me, I knew he wasn't joking. I couldn't shake the dread that washed over me, but I had to look. I peeked out of the tent flap, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, swaying slightly. But what truly sent chills down my spine was what he was wearing: women's lingerie. The sight was surreal and horrifying, and I immediately pulled my head back in. We quickly decided we had to confront him. My friend shouted for him to leave us alone. "Excuse me, can you off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise abruptly stopped, and for a split second, silence enveloped us. Then we heard footsteps rushing toward the tent. Panic set in as we yelled again, "Seriously, get off! We have cell phones in here. We'll call the cops." The footsteps paused, and then I heard him moving away, heading off into the dark. We lay there, wide-eyed and shaken, the adrenaline still coursing through us. Neither of us slept a wink that night. As dawn broke, we scrambled to pack up and get the hell out of there, feeling unnerved by the whole experience. Even now, I can't help but wonder what that guy was doing out there, and what might have happened if we had reacted differently. Sometimes, it's better not to know. Many years ago, during the summer and fall, my parents often took my sister and me on weekend camping trips. We usually went to the same spot, which I remember vividly. We'd drive about 30 miles out of town on a country road, then turn onto a dirt road winding up a mountain. The area was perfect for outdoor activities: dirt biking, shooting, hiking, whatever you could imagine. As we followed the road deeper into the woods, smaller paths branched off into nowhere. If you continued far enough, you'd stumble upon an old abandoned quarry. It wasn't huge, but there were a few big blast holes and piles of broken granite. My sister and I loved exploring it, and not many people ventured past the quarry, probably thinking it was still in use. This trip started just like all the others: sunshine, laughter, and excitement as we made our way to our familiar campsite. The dirt road led us through fields of tall grass, scattered pine and oak trees, and large rocks. We set up camp with a tent, a table, folding chairs, and a fire pit surrounded by flat stones, perfect for warming coffee or hot chocolate. We spent our days shooting at cans with BB guns and a small .22 rifle, and my dad loved teaching us how to handle a gun. My sister and I enjoyed it too. We also hiked, gathering firewood and carving small pieces into shapes like animals or ornaments. Sometimes we just lounged around the camp, reading while the sounds of the forest filled the air. Our favorite part was visiting the lake nearby. The road used to lead there, but it was blocked by a big iron gate marked "No Access." It had been closed due to parking problems, and a newer road had been built, so most people used that instead. As a result, the old path and surrounding campsites were almost always empty. My sister and I felt like we had the whole place to ourselves, free to wander without adult supervision. We'd spend hours skipping stones and trying to catch fish. One morning at sunrise, we woke up excited to head to the lake for some early fishing. We grabbed our gear and walked side by side down the dusty road toward the iron gate, about 3/4 of a mile away. It was another half-mile down the hill to the lake, a walk that took about 25 minutes. As we neared the gate, everything seemed normal until I noticed a car parked in front of it. It wasn't unusual for someone to find this lesser-known entrance, so I figured it was just an early morning fisherman. But as we got closer, I saw two people sitting inside the car. It was an ordinary-looking vehicle, nothing particularly fancy or worn down. The windows were down and the couple was talking quietly. When they noticed us, they hushed each other. The man leaned out with a cheerful voice. "Good morning, kids." His friendliness put me at ease. There was a woman sitting next to him, and at first everything seemed fine. We responded with a cheerful, "Good morning." I was holding my fishing gear, so only my sister waved. "Isn't it a bit early for you guys? Where are your parents?" he asked. "They're back at camp," I said, gesturing over my shoulder. "They'll be down later after breakfast." "Well, you two be careful," the woman added. "It's a long way down." "Thanks," we replied, turning back toward the lake. At first it didn't seem strange, just some friendly people. But as we walked away, the man called out again, making me stop and turn around. "Is that your sister?" he asked, his tone suddenly off. "Yeah," I said, feeling uneasy. "Just be careful, you never know what's out here." He said this with a wide, unsettling smile, and in that moment I felt a shiver run down my spine. I quickly caught up to my sister, who was obliviously walking ahead. We kept moving, but that encounter lingered in my mind, a sense of dread settling over me. They shouted a few more odd phrases after us, things that sounded like movie quotes or foreign words, but I didn't stick around to listen. As we reached the lake, we tried to shake off the weird encounter and focus on fishing. The water was calm, the sky clear, and we had the place to ourselves. We set up and started casting our lines. After a while, we decided to move to a shady spot near some rocks. We caught a few fish, but then my sister pointed to something in the water. It was a blood stain, dried and caked onto the rocks we were standing on. I didn't panic. Blood wasn't unusual in fishing spots. But then I saw a pair of dress shoes floating by. Fancy shoes, one of them with blood inside. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if it was connected to that couple? My heart raced. My sister and I quickly packed up and decided to head back to camp. As we hiked up the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like something was off. When we reached the top, the car was still there, but the couple was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, but we didn't get far before I heard a sharp whistle. I turned around to see the man standing among the trees, barefoot. The woman's voice came from nearby, asking if we had caught anything. My heart raced as I grabbed my sister and urged her to run back to camp. She bolted ahead, and I followed, constantly checking behind me. We made it back safely, breathless and panicked. Our parents took us seriously but couldn't find any clear evidence of the strange couple. Later, when we returned to the lake, they were gone. The unsettling memory of that day has stayed with me ever since. Years after those childhood camping trips, I was on a weekend getaway with some friends. We were all excited to escape the city, eager to reconnect with nature and each other. The campsite was remote, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of the wilderness. The first night passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and campfire songs. But as the sun set and darkness enveloped the woods, an unsettling feeling crept in. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of rustling outside our tent. My friend Jack was snoring beside me, and I glanced at my watch. It was around 2 a.m. At first, I thought it was just an animal rummaging around, but then I heard a soft voice calling out. It was Melissa, Jack's fiancée. Curiosity got the better of me, and I unzipped the tent flap. I stepped out into the cool night air, squinting against the dim light. To my surprise, I saw Melissa standing about 10 feet away from the tent, her back to me. She was moving in a slow, almost eerie manner, as if she were trying to mimic something. "Melissa?" I called out, feeling a chill run down my spine. She didn't respond, just kept swaying slightly, her movements strangely synchronized with the night sounds. My heart raced as I took a few cautious steps closer. "Melissa?" I called again, but still no answer. Suddenly, I noticed something that froze me in place. There was another figure, identical to Melissa, standing just to the side. This doppelganger mirrored her every move, its head tilted in an uncanny way. I couldn't see the face clearly, but it felt wrong, disturbingly wrong. Panic surged through me as I turned back toward the tent. I unzipped the flap and quickly peeked inside. There was Melissa, sound asleep, completely unaware of what was happening outside. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced back, and the doppelganger had turned its head slightly, its gaze locked on me. Instinct kicked in, and I hurried back inside the tent, my heart pounding. I shook Jack awake, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what I'd seen. "Jack, there's something out there. Something that looks like Melissa." He rubbed his eyes, clearly disoriented, and I could see skepticism creeping onto his face. "What are you talking about? Are you sure you didn't just dream it?" But I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I knew what I saw. The doppelganger had been so eerily precise, like a reflection gone wrong. We decided to stay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. I felt paranoid, every rustle making me jump. After an hour of uneasy silence, I finally convinced Jack to pack up and leave early. We didn't tell the others. I didn't want to sound crazy. The drive back was tense, and the unsettling memory clung to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something supernatural had happened that night, something beyond explanation. Even now, years later, I still can't forget that moment in the dark, standing in front of the doppelganger. It left me with a deep-seated fear of camping, the woods, and the things that might be lurking just out of sight.